So much silence and so much, attention to. So warm welcome. Please take your seats. Sanibunan? Tobel. Goeienaand, dames en heren. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very special privilege and a great honor to welcome you all to the professorial inauguration of a good friend and a fine academic, Professor Charles Mbohwa. And I'm certain that we all look forward to this evening as much as Charles looks forward to getting this finally behind his back. So allow me to extend a very special welcome to Mrs. Georgina Mbohwa. Siamkel. This is, of course, Charles's mother. His sister, Ms. Exhibit Mbohwa, and his wife and partner, Ms. Kirsten Mbohwa Pagels. It's indeed a special privilege to welcome all of the clan, the Mbohwa clan, and the family and the supporters this evening, for whom this, of course, is a very special occasion. Allow me also to extend a very special and a warm welcome to the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environments International Review panel members, Professors Bird, me, and Bak Slogo. I hope I got that right. A special welcome to you for finding time in your very busy schedules to come and participate in this very important project here at the University of Johannesburg. So, to begin then with the formalities, let me recognize the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment, Professor Sorab Sena. Let me also recognize, of course, Professor Charles Mbohwa, Professor Alan Brent, who will be responding, our colleague from the University of Stellenbosch, who's flown in from another country of the Western Cape this afternoon. We were saying jokingly earlier. Warm welcome, and again, we sincerely appreciate that you could find time to come and join us. And in particular to find time to review Professor Mbohwa's lecture, and that you could find time to come and join us this evening. Allow me also to recognize the senior leaders in the university who have joined us this evening. I recognize in particular our Dean of the Faculty Management, who's also found time to come and join us. Welcome, Professor Daniel van Lille, the Vice Dean of the Faculty, the heads of departments, and other colleagues who have joined us for this very special occasion. Let me also recognize members of Senate and other academics from the University of Johannesburg and from our peer institutions. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's indeed a great honor and a special privilege for me to welcome you to the professorial inaugural lecture of Professor Charles Mbohwa. I noticed that there is a gap between the front row and the rest of us in the back row. I'm wondering what explains that. You can see I'm easily distracted, right? So this, of course, is a very special occasion for Charles, for his loved ones, for his special guests, and for his colleagues. It is so because it's a proud and a joyful moment. It's also a landmark moment for all of you, for Professor Mbohwa, and of course for all of us here at the University of Johannesburg and higher education in South Africa and beyond. I always make the observation, although it might be quite self-evident, that the title, the honor, the office of professor is not an honor that is university bound, that is specific university bound. It is an honor, it is an office, it is a title that has worldwide currency. And so when the University of Johannesburg or the University of Stellenbosch or the University of the Witwatersrand, or for that matter, our colleagues at the University of Lagos or at Makerere or at Nairobi or at Ghana Legon, and I can go on. When decisions are made in the senates of those organizations, including this one, the promotion to professorship or the appointment into professorship is a universal tradition, and therefore the expectation is that we meet universal standards. As I say, always I say on this occasion, Professor Mbohwa is going to demonstrate whether in fact the University of Johannesburg standards measures up to those of the standards of our peers when he delivers his lecture this evening. And so it's important for us to acknowledge then that unlike the senior public servant, where there's significant variance across territories and traditions in respect of the appointment of such senior public servants, there is no global standard. Although we may wish for global standards, we may speak of the training of senior public servants and so on and so forth, the traditions are fundamentally different. In the instance of the most senior scholar of the academic community, the professor, the standard, we believe, must be the same, taking into account, of course, domestic conditions. We, of course, know that inaugurations, many a time pompous and decadent, but hopefully mostly unsullied, well-meaning and dignified, date back in our various cultural traditions to different times. Taken up in ancient Greece, I'm sure taken up even further back in ancient African history. But the idea of the inauguration is the opportunity for the formal investiture of a person into high office, and it marks the formal, albeit often the symbolic, assumption of the office or the position of hierarchy or authority. And this is simply because professors do not have time to prepare, often on time, their inaugural addresses, and then finding the time slot is something else. Here at the University of Johannesburg, for example, we have a lag period of some 18 months. And I'm not saying Professor Mbohwa is one of those who made use of the opportunity to delay as long as is possible. All that I'm saying is that it is rarely the case that within 3 months of promotion, or even 6 months of promotion, we have the professorial inauguration. And so today is the rites, or marks the rites of passage of our colleague and friend, of his entry, symbolically, into the distinguished community of university's most senior scholars. This is an office and a position of authority and leadership which we shall not assume lightly, but shall do so with considerable and ongoing thought, reflection, deliberation, and dare I say, presence of mind. I remarked earlier that the professorial inauguration is as important to the incumbent and their loved ones and colleagues as it is to the university. And as I implied earlier, the inaugural lecture is as much as a reflection on the state and the intent of the contemporary university and how it will measure up this evening to Professor Mbohwa's inaugural lecture on the journey towards sustainable engineering. On these occasions and others, I often contextualize the professorial inauguration and lecture further by reminding us of the place and the role, special place and special role of the contemporary university. On this occasion, I remind us of Vartan Gregorian's hopefulness, and dare I add controversy, when he suggested that universities are not only past repositories, not only repositories of past human endeavor, they are instruments of civilization. They provide tools for learning, for understanding and progress. And he concludes they are the wellspring of action, a source of self-renewal, of intellectual growth and of hope. They are mediums of progress, of autonomy, of empowerment, of independence and of self-determination. I also offer us the argument of Wernick that the university has a contradictory relationship with its surrounding society. On the one hand, the autonomy in terms of its axial values of truth, of wisdom, of science, and so forth. And on the other side, he argues those who control the means of material production control the means of mental production. And the dominant ideas are the ideas of those who dominate. And of the reflections of a friend of us here at the University of Johannesburg, Professor Emmanuel Wallerstein, who argues that, as he considers his own journey, it seems to me that it's the duty of the scholar to be politically and intellectually subversive of received truths, but that the only way for this subversion to be socially useful is if it reflects a serious attempt to engage with and to understand the real world as best as we can. I'm also reminded that there are very few books available in decent bookstores on what it is to be a professor, and in particular what the freedoms and duties of this most senior scholar of the university is. In this regard, I offer the reflections of another friend of ours and visiting professor here at the University of Johannesburg, Bruce McFarlane, based at Hong Kong University, in his book Intellectual Leadership in Higher Education, Renewing the Role of the University Professor, seeks to correct this oversight and argues, I believe convincingly, that given the corporatization of the research agenda, professors must reclaim professorial leadership, and that they thus occupy a very special role. Specifically, McFarlane argues that two freedoms, that of critic and of advocate, are essential for professors to execute their four principal duties: those of mentor, of guardian of standards, of enabler, and networker and mobilizer of resources for others, and fourthly, as ambassador for the institution or discipline. And so this evening we will have only one small, very small insight into how Professor Mbohwa responds to this call for the return of professorial leadership. Allow me now to invite the Executive Dean of the Faculty, Professor Saurabh Sinha, to introduce Professor Mbohwa. I thank you. Riala Boa. Siyabonga. Bye-bye.
All right, good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Charles Mbohwa. Professor Charles Mbohwa is an NRF-rated established researcher and professor in the field of sustainability engineering, focusing on renewable energy. I suppose for our guests this evening, the NRF stands for the National Research Foundation. In January 2012, he was confirmed as an established researcher making significant contribution to the developing fields of sustainability and life cycle assessment. Since then, he has worked on sustainability engineering with emphasis on energy, systems, life cycle assessment, and bioenergy fuel feasibility and renewable energy. Professor Mbohwa holds a BSc Honours in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Zimbabwe, 1986, a Master's in Operations Management and Manufacturing Systems from the University of Nottingham in 1992, and a Doctor of Engineering from the Tokyo Metropolitan Institute of Technology, 2004. He is a professional mechanical engineer registered with the Engineering Council of Zimbabwe and is a fellow of the Zimbabwean Institution of Engineers. He was a mechanical engineer in the National Railways of Zimbabwe from 1986 to 1991, lecturer and senior lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe, and then joined the University of Johannesburg as a senior lecturer in 2007. He rose to the professorial levels since then, and in July 2014 was also appointed as Vice Dean Postgraduate Studies, Research and Innovation in the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment. Professor Mbohwa was a Japan Foundation Fellow in 1996-97 at the International University of Japan, researching on sustainable technology transfer. This is a most prestigious Japanese fellowship, normally reserved for postdoctoral fellows. It's a Fulbright scholarship at the Georgia Institute of Technology, investigating the development of sustainable supply chains models in engineering organizations. He has also presented at numerous conferences and has published more than 150 papers in peer-reviewed journals and conferences, 6 book chapters and 2 books. He has received several awards for his research papers at international conferences and has been and for his journal publications, many of which are in high impact factor ISI or Thomson Reuters Web of Knowledge listed journals. Since 2012, he has published 22 journal papers in these listed databases and 4 book chapters and 1 book. 69 of his publications are listed on Scopus, where they are rapidly picking up citations. He's been a collaborator to the United Nations Development Programme, or UNDP, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, United Nations Environment Programme, and also been a visiting exchange professor at Federal University of Technology in Paraná in Brazil. He's an active member of the United Nations Environment Programme, Society of Environmental and Toxicology and Chemistry Life Cycle Initiative, where he served on several task force and teams. He is one of the authors of the International Guidelines on Life Cycle Assessment. He's been invited to be a founding member of the Social Life Cycle Assessment Alliance, coordinated by the World Resources Forum and UNEP, which is United Nations Environmental Programme. My panelists reminded me that we tend to use quite a few acronyms. I'm just being aware of that. Professor Mbohwa has successfully supervised many postgraduate students and postdoctoral fellows. I want to list a couple of his achievements from his postdoctoral fellows. In South Africa and in other parts of the developing world, capacity development is key, and Professor Mbohwa has certainly contributed in this regard. One of his postdoctoral fellows supervised was Dr. Agatha Loguedes, who's now attained an associate professor in national system evaluation in the Italian system. She's also published in journals with an impact factor of about 6, which in this discipline is a fairly high impact factor. Another postdoctoral research fellow is Dr. Anu Pradhan, who's also published a paper in an impact factor, in a similar impact factor journal, and also simultaneously managed to attract about 1.5 million rand of external funding. The third postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Edwan, has published 6 journal papers in just 1 year. And the fourth one is Dr. Abuyadi, who has recently left us as a postdoctoral fellow, but has also attracted some 6 million rands of funding from these program together with the city of Johannesburg. Some of these individuals are likely to be in the academic tiers, since we're looking into recruiting some pretty soon. So Professor Mbohwa's contribution around capacity development is something that we very much value. And with these very few words, you're here to listen to Professor Mbohwa, so I'll be calling upon him next.
Anyway, I hope you can all hear me. I think it is a singular honor to have you come and listen to me. I think it is an honor for me, an honor for my faculty, for my family, and for my colleagues. So basically, I'm going to talk about the journey to sustainability engineering. In terms of acknowledgement, I just wanted to quickly, again, acknowledge our Vice Chancellor in terms of the kind of environment that has been created at the University of Johannesburg. I think when I was in Zimbabwe, I could see that throughout Southern Africa, there was a flow of orange, I would say, being the logo color of the University of Johannesburg. And through that attraction, I got to get interested in the University of Johannesburg. It's a very visible brand that is quite well known in Southern Africa and in Africa, and increasingly worldwide as a university. I think University of Johannesburg has done in 10 years what can make any kind of institution very proud, in the sense that whenever I travel around, either for conferences or other meetings, people know the name, and they mistake it and say that, is that old university in Johannesburg? And I said, no. It's just to show the kind of brand that has been created in this 10-year period. I don't want to mention names, but I see that some people are already smiling. They know maybe the implication. I want to thank the UJ family. Thank you for coming. It's nice to have an audience to talk to, and colleagues, thank you for coming. I also want to thank Alan Brandt for coming to assist in this occasion. I think when I started some research, me and my students actually were referring to his work. So he and one other professor at the University of Cape Town were pioneers in terms of sustainability assessment on a scientific level. I also want to acknowledge my parents. My late father, who passed away in 19th September 2009. I think I just have given some of his favorite words and quotes. He only wanted to be happy and to have a long life. And at 78, he confessed to me many times that his life had been long and happy, that he really wanted nothing from this earth, and I really admired that. I've taken a number of other quotations that he has given. I won't go into details. But what I wanted to mention is that at one time, he was being offered to be a mayor of a city called Kwekwe in Zimbabwe. And he said that he had not taken it up because he didn't want blood on his hands and to burden the future generations by having blood on his hands. So I think it's a kind of man who did not seek positions at any cost, by any means necessary. And I think it's one of the lessons that I really value, because I believe that is the kind of idea that can propel one towards happiness and towards a conscience that is clean. So it's what I would call conscience cleanliness. So I would want to recognize him in that way. I want also to recognize my mother, who has often been referred to as the Chief Justice in his community, in terms of resolving even petty issues between friends before a fist fight, and always finding a way of apportioning blame to one, even if you are very right, 90% right, and then hammering the one who is more wrong later on to satisfy both sides. I think she has been schooled in Wesleyan Methodist Church, and is still active in that church. She has been really a pillar of inspiration. In a church, they call her a lecturer, because of the way she interacts with other church members. But I call her a professor of life. So I hope that sticks. I want to thank also my wife. As a young man, I used to pray a lot, and one of the prayers was for a good wife. But then I got more than that, and some people traditionally have said, behind every successful man is a woman, and over time I realized not even on the side do you have a woman, but I'm lagging behind her. So I would say that ahead of a successful man or somebody pretending to be successful like me is a very successful woman, more successful woman. I want to recognize you, Kirsten Pagels, Mbohwa Pagels. Thank you for your support. I think the presentation plan is, some of you might already have seen it. I'm looking at the challenge of human beings in terms of how we have interacted, going on to sustainable development, defining it in terms of cost, economic, environmental, and social impacts, and then looking at what I've done along the line in terms of leadership and mentorship, in terms of my own research activities, and among others, and then finally just indicate my future plans and activities. I think just to emphasize the scale of the problem of pollutants. Smog, I think, has been coined to refer to smoky fog, and here you can see a number of images that show you how New York looked at one time in 1988, before they started cleaning it up. The two views of Beijing city, we've been there a number of occasions, and it can be anything, any day. And with such kind of scenarios, obviously you have challenges. And Claude Monet, when he was painting London, gave a very bleak view of London. I think it was a smoggy day when he was in that heavy mood. I just want to give another example. I won't go into all. The issue of the Minamata disease in Japan, and to think that, this is caused by human beings. Through pollution, through alkyl mercury that is bonded into organic compounds, and then this is the kind of children you can have, and that's another example. So in essence, it's a very worrying pattern, and most people really look to that example as what we can do as engineers and chemists in terms of our plant operations, pollution, and impact on society. Basically, the mercury organic compounds in the placenta, instead of cleaning up what goes to the child, they transfer all the organic mercury to the baby, and that destroys the nervous system, and people become disabled and so forth. So just to say, the nature of the problem that we are trying to address when we are looking at sustainability is not a small issue. There could be several examples that one can cite. And it was within that environment that the United Nations came together, and we have this famous Brundtland report, which tried to look into our common future. How do we address these issues of pollution, these challenges that we are having to the environment, and generally looking at how we can sustain it. I think initially deforestation was the main thing that was the main topic, but over time you find that we have had to look at other issues in terms of what are we going to bequeath to future generations, and that's really the issue here. So you're looking at economic, environmental, and social and political implications, because when you're dealing with China, for example, they're saying that we also have a right to development. We have a right to drive a car and so forth. So how do you politically solve that sustainability problem? It poses more questions than answers. In terms of my personal journey to sustainability engineering, when I was young, I think I was excited to see a big bus, 76-seater, and this one, we called him Chumtashu, which means somebody with very big lips in my language. I was controlling this big, 10, 20, 15-ton vehicle, and all these people, depending on this person, 19 passengers standing normally. They're allowed for standing. And it was very attractive for me to really look at that as a career. I thought of being a teacher, and after taking part in the Southern Africa Old Mutual Mathematics Olympiad, I was one of the 10 finalists in Southern Africa, and I was being attracted to take actuarial science, by Old Mutual. It was. The only challenge, of course, was that they said, you have to go and study in South Africa first before you do anything. And having tested a bit of independence, it became a very, very challenging direction to go towards. And then, of course, a fellow of mine who was a senior, one of the finalists, also took up electrical engineering. And I said, well, I still call him a brother, Emmanuel Mizi. And my family knows him because we've kept ties. And I said, well, I'll compliment you by doing mechanical engineering. So I became a cadet at the railways, and then during that time again, we had a very serious decision to make. Shall we dispose of steam locomotives? And there were arguments for in terms of environment and against. And then again, I was not satisfied. I was in charge of steam locomotives with 100 of them, and they looked very elegant and nice. But then, a diesel locomotive using diesel from Sasol, what are the life cycle impacts on the environment? So again, even though a decision to scrap steam locomotives was taken, the issues were not very clear to me. And then after doing a master's in Nottingham, or during doing that process of studying, I came across the concept of green manufacturing and cleaner production, where you're looking at instead of pollution control, which was really quite active in the 60s. In the 70s, people were saying, why control when you can prevent? So the focus here was on prevention of pollution, and hence cleaner production came about. So 1994 was that move where you had to look at having national cleaner production centers all over, and I attended a course, of course, facilitated by the Zimbabwe Institution of Engineers to look at that. generally, we're looking at refining and continuing to develop the methodology for cleaner production, ways of identifying no-cost options. Some of them are profitable. You can all be cleaning the environment and making money, and some of them, of course, would cost. But when you look at it, if pollution prevention had been done in Japan, 2,000 people who died from the Minamata disease might not have died. So what cost do you put to that? What's the economic value of life? So I think these are some of the challenges that one really has to look at. And then during that time, of course, we were able to set up 2 master's courses, manufacturing systems and operations management and renewable energy. All of them had minor dissertations, and we tended to push really cleaner production and looking at the environment. During that time also, I think I'll have a quick run on these ones. We went through a lot of stages. With the AfriPren, which was looking at the energy policy research. As many as 13 books have been written really on energy policy, focusing on renewable energy and other issues. And then the Roundtable, Sustainable Consumption and Production, where I'm currently a board member, again looking at how we can look at sustainability in terms of consumption and other issues. Auckland, I think that's where I started to really interact with Alan Brent, where we were looking at developing life cycle assessment, and I'll discuss later on what the details of life cycle assessment are, Suntrain and so forth. And recently we have a global network on resource efficiency and cleaner production that is quite active. The results are very interesting. I think you're talking about saving billions of dollars through cleaner production. Using the South Africa Cleaner Production Center, which is at the CSR. So I work very closely with them, and recently we are looking at industrial symbiosis in 2 or 3 industrial parks, how the waste from one industry can be used as a raw material by other industries within a cluster. In terms of Japanese experience, I thought it would be interesting to trace that part of the history. Obviously, having gone there through the Japan Foundation Fellowship, I then had a link to the Vice President for Toshiba and many other people. And I think it's very interesting how the Japanese culture works. If you know somebody, then you're almost there, no matter how good or bad you are. And I hope I was good. So the Vice President actually then linked me up to Tokyo Metropolitan Institute of Technology. What had happened is that I had 4 places to study for a PhD in the US, and my boss, stroke wife, decided that I should look at Japan before I really go there. Then my fiance. So the priorities had to change. But what interested me there was, while doing my studies, initially I thought I would look at ISO 14000, its implementation and its impact on sustainability. That changed over time. But, our professor emphasized that you do other projects. He says, if I employ you, I support you, therefore you must look at other things. One of the projects we did was a Toyota parallel parking assistance system, using mirrors and sensors to assist you with parking. And that technology is really advanced that actually a car can parallel park on its own. And to think that that design team with Stanford University was quite active in the initial stages of that technology is also quite exciting. We had also looking at emotional car, where actually a car can try to interact with you to prevent accidents, checking your blood pressure, talking to you and say, your voice sounds low, what's wrong? Why are you not responding? And then it would call your wife's cell phone and say, or your friend's cell phone, and say, can you phone this guy? I think something is wrong. So it looks at your emotions, and then really, so emotional engineering is one thing that is developing, and my former supervisor, Professor Fukuda, has written 2 books on that and is taking it much further. And then, what was interesting is the Kohai and Senpai system. It's the Japanese culture where when you come into a lab, even if somebody is 20 years younger than you, they are your superior in terms of guidance and so forth. So I didn't get it for 1.5 years. And after 1.5 years, I realized that I had to rely a lot on my senpais. In other words, that's more senior students who are supervised by my supervisor. So you have more peer learning and peer interaction. The requirement was to have 3 journal papers before you start writing your thesis. I didn't know that. So 1.5 years later, with 1.5 years to go, I had to sit down and write some journal papers. And that was a very interesting kind of 6 months. But somehow, within a year, something had worked out. And then after the first journal paper said, oh yeah, thank you, you've done it, but the supervisor, by our regulations, must also be a co-author. So by the 4th paper, he was more pitiful and said, okay, now you can start writing your thesis. Fortunately, the 4th paper was accepted before I completed my PhD. Again, I think it's the debate that we have, should students publish or not, how do you progress, and capacitate them as you supervise. I tend to insist on my students doing publishing, and many students run away from me. But I still have too many, so I hope it's working. That we looked at many topics that time, whether ICT systems really help, do they really serve the environment, the rebound effects. In other words, if you are very efficient because you are using virtual technologies and you are replacing travel with teleconferences, with video conferences and so forth, does the environment benefit in the end? And the rebound effect says no, as long as people's incomes get high and then they do something else to destroy the environment. Yeah. So again, it's challenging those economic models and trying to see how you can be more holistic in terms of how you analyze things like dematerialization, immaterialization to reduce material and so forth, material use. So it's just the kind of topic that I got from the Japanese experience. In terms of environmental life cycle assessment, I did not go in detail, but basically all you're saying is you are analyzing a product from materials extraction through its life, as it is used, maintained, until you throw it away. It reminds me, as youngsters, we used to play around with a truck that was completely dead and beyond its life. We learned how to drive static. Yeah. And that was very interesting. So we were looking at, for example, a car's life from the time it is born, you maintain it and so forth. So you might find that one product is expensive at the beginning, but throughout the life cycle is cheaper in terms of life cycle costing and so forth. And also when you look at characterization of the different impact categories that you face with, carbon versus methane, you might find that methane is so much appetite for heat retention that it absorbs all the heat and warms up its space, So 25 times more than carbon. So this is the kind of analysis and results that have come through this kind of work. Just to show the life cycle assessment with that small diagram, where you look at defining what you want to do, and then inventory, of course, is trying to look at all materials that go in. Yeah, you are burning fuel, what is going out? How much sulfur dioxide, how much carbon dioxide, how much carbon monoxide, and so forth. So all those are inventories. Inventory is just quantifying the pollutants and so forth. But the actual environmental impacts are very difficult to imagine. You can say, okay, I've laid out carbon dioxide. Was it taken up by the tree next to it? Or did it actually maybe contribute to global warming, if you believe in it, which I do, and so forth. So I think you are looking at the main critical impacts being human health, ecosystem quality, and so forth, climate change. Just to look at roughly the kind of used impact categories, I've listed some here. In global warming, I've indicated, I think I just want to draw your attention to the highlights that are in red, where you, in the last column, really look at converting data to characterize it. To say, like I say, carbon is less in terms of retaining heat than methane 25 times, for example. 25 times as bad as, methane is 25 times as bad as carbon dioxide of the same mass. Yeah, so if you take a kg of carbon dioxide and kg of methane, methane is more harmful to the environment 25 times in terms of heat retention as a greenhouse gas, for example. So I don't think I need to go into details on that, but it was just to show you that there are a lot of categories that you have to work with, toxicity and so forth. And I think being a general audience, I didn't want to go into more details other than to show how you, the type of categories that one would need to analyze. So within that, we'll be looking at how you can then set up databases for collecting the kind of inventory, the information that you want. How much sulfur dioxide is set out, how do you get the information and so forth. And guidelines were not existing. And in 2011, through the United Nations Environmental Program, we went to Ayama, which is a nice place. You can see Fuji Mountain there, very beautiful mountain. And we're working there. And I was lucky and honored to be part of that team. So the guidelines are available on the internet as post-print. If you want the real publication, you have to buy it. But post-print is good enough. Yeah. So I think there's that debate on institutional repository and what have you, but that's another thing. Life cycle costing. I think basically you're looking at costs through the life cycle. It could be financial, environmental, social costs. How many people are dying from pollution and so forth. And try to quantify that using numerical values. And generally, all of them, they look at the whole life cycle. And here I just present, like you can look at planning, design, operation, whatever, until the product dies. So there's cradle to grave being when the product is born until it's dead, just like people. And then, cradle to cradle, where you look at product going all the way until you reuse it as a raw material for another process. So in other words, the product goes, but instead of disposing it to landfill, you can actually use it for other products and so forth. So just noting, I think I mentioned that the cheapest car might be more expensive. So that's the kind of arrangement you have. In red there, you have initial expenditure of buying, say, equipment or machinery or whatever, or installing a plant. But what is interesting is that you have 4 other different types of costs during the life cycle that you have to look at. And in investment appraisal of engineering projects, of any project, it's essential that that kind of life cycle costing be done. Social impacts, again, what's the social impact of what you are doing? For example, I think we had one of the students looking at growing sugar cane in Zimbabwe, and then when the sugar cane is grown, a lot of snakes like the shadow and everything, so they come in. So when you come to harvesting, social impacts can be dire if you run into a snake that is really excited. So they tend to burn everything, throw away the energy and burn the whole sugar plantation to take away the leaves so that the snakes are either burnt or they run away. So again, these are social impacts of sugar production which one has to look at one time of its life cycle. Again, you have categories and so forth. I'm not going into the details, but it just shows you the various categories there that you can look at in terms of human rights, in terms of worker, working conditions, and it's difficult then to look at the subcategories of such a study. How do you quantify it scientifically? And we try to attempt that. And what we've done in 2013, again, an international project with all the experts worldwide. We focus, of course, on chapter 2 here, but all the 10 chapters we contributed in plenary session. So we were authoring a document, and we really wanted to leave that place after having written everything, and this is what happened. And then thereafter, of course, we had to peer review that kind of work, and I had a role in peer reviewing the publication which is given here. And you can see, I think, the kind of authors that we're working with. Most of them are, I think, names known to Alan Brent here. Alan Brent, sorry, I was here. And then coming to life cycle sustainability assessment. We looked at life cycle costing, environmental, life cycle assessment, and social life cycle assessment. And we're saying, how then do you combine these three? there are times when socio-economic needs clash with environmental needs, and you know, we will try to make sense out of it all. And it's not additive as it is shown, but we are in the process of developing methodologies of how we can really scientifically try and explain how you can be more sustainable. Looking at ELCA is environmental life cycle assessment. Life cycle costing looks at economic life cycle assessment and social life cycle assessment as the three pillars of sustainability. And you know, it's interesting how you can work on those. So generally, I'm not defining this because it's always the same kind of definition. But what I wanted to link is to say when you've done all those different life cycle assessments and they've tried to integrate them, out of it now is a developing field that we call sustainability engineering, going beyond sustainable engineering to looking at any engineering undertaking from a life cycle perspective. For example, you know, you have environmental inventories being done by countries and reported through the United Nations system, but they look for 1 year. You know, in 2015, this is the harm we've done, 2014, 2016, and so forth. But here we want projections that are of a life cycle nature. So similarly from engineering, we're looking at projections that are of a life cycle nature, beyond year-by-year analysis. Yeah. Of course, the system boundary there is always a challenge, which is something that we have talked about. But anyway, having given that brief idea of what I've been doing and what it means, I just wanted to touch a bit on research mentorship that I've done. Not everybody is here, but I just try to summarize those which are a bit more interesting. Lipson Mashoko, I think, has had 2 journal papers, one of them impact factor 3.8, and he was doing masters and now works for CSIR. Yeah. Unfortunately, he couldn't go on to PhD, and I've been trying to push him. Fore is the same thing, former master students, a colleague, now at Cape Peninsula University of Technology. Again, you can see the profile. An interesting aspect is Lojudice and Carlos Ingrao. Yeah. So through a postdoc, Dr. Agata Lojudice, I got in touch with Carlo, and there's an extended research group. And these two had not published any document before. Now they are sitting on 8 journal papers for Agata, and Carlos 12 journal papers. And Carlos has actually graduated from getting assistance from me to design his research, to improve on data collection, and to write the journal papers. And both of them are now classified in associate professor status in Italy. And that's interesting that at least we could transfer something from south to to the north. Michael Mting is a PhD student. For the last 2 years, he has been in the top 10 within the faculty in terms of research output units. That's what we count, where one journal paper is 1 unit if you are single author and so forth. And he has been a runaway student, really keeping me too busy, including writing a book. And recently, I think we have another book whose contract has been accepted by Springer. And he's now managing me as he graduates, goes towards graduation, and now tells me what to do and how we should write the next book, and that I should actually visit him in Namibia and complete writing the next book. So Emmanuel didn't think I was mentioned 6 journal papers in 1 year. Madani read 2 journal papers and already done quite one of them impact factor 2, and is doing quite reasonably well. I think I'll quickly flash through these ones. Basically, it just shows the kind of collaborations I've had over the years. My professor was always appointed at Stanford University, and he's now a consulting professor there. So we are still in touch and working together on a number of things. I've been to, the number given there, just the QS ranking of the institution that I'm working with. Some people don't like ranking, but anyway, when you look at how it's arrived at, there's some value to it. I will mention also University of Manchester. We recently have a distinguished visiting professor who was visiting us, and we were looking at how we can recycle composites that are used for aircraft wings and so forth. So you know, it's some kind of these links have some benefits in terms of access to certain high-tech industries. Shanghai Jiaotao, again, visit that. I work with Professor Yu there, and it's quite fruitful. I think I don't need to go too much into this, but just to show that there is active collaboration with interesting institutions, Georgia Institute of Technology, Ohio State University, the University in Stuttgart, Santa Barbara Alto University. We are just beginning something with them. So I think just to show, at least for my research group here, that we confirm which direction we are going. Same for the research activities. Over the years, I've worked on the first project with a professor in Brazil, a professor in China, and then the third one is with Professor Valerie Thomas, again, Georgia Institute of Technology. All of them are normally looking at life cycle assessment, bioenergy, that kind of fields. But I don't need to go into all these in detail. And the research activities in sustainability engineering, similarly, those are just a continuation of the previous one. I have a doctoral student actually on the third one, where we are working with Germans to look at criticality assessment of rare earth metals, particularly the platinum group metals. My visa, I think, sitting here. I hope you'll do well in that area. We've also been working on industrial symbiosis, like I said, with the Cleaner Production Center here in South Africa. In general, of course, the other thing we are trying to see with indigenous knowledge, how it can be applied in different areas. I know in agriculture, of course, my parents used to say, never cut down a fruit tree, just plow around it, when people talk of permaculture, you start to see what you can learn. Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, I just wanted to highlight, I think basically this institute has been, during the Cold War, the link between East and West, and I've worked with doctoral students in that program, which was hosted by University of Free State, and three of them have won prizes, and I'm happy that I was lucky to work with such a group. Nathaniel Tyndall, I knew him from Georgia Institute of Technology linkages. The others I met in that program. But just it also gives the kind of topics that we've been working on, and anyone interested to do a PhD might find some of the topics comparatively interesting, extending beyond what is shown here. In terms of publications, I think this one also is just a quick run through. Basically, what I've done is to look at top 25% journals that we have published in as a group in renewable energy, in waste management, and the ranking of those journals. For example, if you look at renewable energy and sustainable reviews, the first one, 28 journals are in the top 25%. So that's 28 out of 112 journals in the area. And then that journal would be ranked number 7 and so forth. So I think we have that handout. I don't need to repeat on that. And I think it's the same with the others. Just to say, we are now attempting to move towards global excellence and stature, which is what the University of Johannesburg is doing. And in that process, this is how we foresee us doing that. That doctoral student, again, has given me some nightmares. And that's one of the nightmare products that we have there. A book, healthcare scheduling, basically looking at various aspects in terms of sustainability and applying operations research and other methods to that. Reviewing of journals, I think that's just statistical. You have that information in your handout again. Mostly Q1, which are top 25% journals in the different fields. In terms of future work, I think there was mentioned by the Dean that I'm part of the Social Life Cycle Assessment Alliance. We are 50 experts and we are looking at various aspects. And the task that we have is, again, methodology refinement and improvement, pioneering new methods of life cycle sustainability assessment, demonstrating projects, capacity building, and so forth. And then I still continue to work with sustainable humanitarian supply chains, modern manufacturing systems. Again, mainly touching on the use of renewable energy in that space. Looking at more mentorship of my colleagues and students and more visibility of Phoebe and targeting, high impact journals and generally improving UJ and this standing. So I think in a nutshell, I've tried to plot a journey in the history of what I've been doing. I've shown maybe how sustainability engineering is developing from life cycle assessment, environmental, economic, and social, and how these tied together have resulted in what we call sustainability engineering. And there's a new area that is also evolving out of that, and hopefully it will help to address a lot of problems that are of a sustainability nature, of sustaining humanity going forward into the future. And I think my passion is that ever since I realized that I could be a small-time mathematician, I've tried to go beyond mathematics and science to applications. And you find that most of this work looks at how do we apply ourselves going into the future, so that maybe we bequeath a better world to future generations. I would like to thank you. In Japanese we say arigato gozaimashita.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First, I want to say many thanks to the University of Johannesburg and specifically the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment for inviting me to these proceedings this evening. As he alluded to, Professor Mbohwa and I have come a long way, so it's a real privilege being here this evening. In response to his lecture this evening, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a complex world. It's what we academics like to refer to as a social ecological system. Okay, that's real jargon. But the premise of that is that we are based on one planet at this point in time of the human trajectory, at least. And I really appreciate an opening line at a symposium of one of our postgrad engineering management students recently. He works for SAB Miller. And he said, he's all for protecting the planet. He's the only one that we know of that makes good beer. So whatever your driver might be around this whole sustainability issue, the fact is we're dealing with complex systems, and the introduction of the Anthropocene, or what we like to call social technical systems, into that social ecological system has created much more complex problems that we have to deal with. Now, Professor Mbohwa alluded to some of those issues, environmental problems and such. But we have a vast other issues that we need to deal with in society: poverty, inequality, the crisis of our financial system and economic system in general. That's how it's referred to as the polycrisis or the nexus. We can't simply deal with one problem at a time anymore. Professor Mbohwa works in renewable energy space, and for those of you that know South Africa, concentrating solar power looks like the technology that can solve a lot of our problems. We're going to go and build it in the Northern Cape. But you know what? There isn't water there to service those plants in the future. Okay, so immediately you deal with the energy-water nexus. Okay, so we need to think about solutions that deal with multiple crises at a time. And this already speaks to what I'll get to in the end in terms of the meaning for the engineering profession. All right, so it's a complex world, and social ecological systems, that sounds very academic. So I was very, very pleased in 2012 when KPMG released a report called Expected Unexpected. Okay, that was a report focused on business leaders. Right? And they said in that report, and what we've said in academia for many years, that we need, in decades, that we need a systems approach to deal with these crises. All right, so at least that was now in the lingo of business leaders. You need a systems approach if you want to survive. Change, it is coming. Okay, so how are you going to deal with that change? We as business, we as society. That's what we refer to as adaptation. We're going to have to adapt to some extent to what we have caused and how our social ecological system changes with time. But we also recognize that we want to change the system. Okay, we want to transition. The South African government talks about a transition to a low carbon resilient economy. You can unpack that, but basically it comes down to a green economy. But very importantly, in the South African and African context, we don't just want change, we want just change. We want change that is fair and speaks and is to the benefit of all of our society. Right, and that is a real challenge, and that's where I want to end off our engineering profession. So we cannot work in isolation from this larger social ecological system and from our society. We have realized in the engineering fraternity that we need to work with other disciplines. Okay, so it's not only about technical solutions. All right, we need to work. So we've moved from multidisciplinary to interdisciplinary, and now it's transdisciplinarity. Now we can debate that. It's a new academic term that's floating around. But in essence, it's not us producing, creating new science, technology, or technology for society. It's creating science, technology, knowledge with society. And I think, Professor Mbohwa, this is one of the challenges that we face in the engineering profession now, is that, yes, we have come a long way developing certain tools that help us understand and unpack the system and look at our solutions and whether they might be sustainable or not into the future, but we have a great challenge to work with society and create some of these solutions going forward. But I look forward to continuing down the road with you as we embark to come up with some of these solutions. Thank you very much.
Well, there we have it. These things are not done democratically. So we now don't call for a vote to say who says that Professor Mbohwa meets the requirement of being an advocate of the university, of being a critic, and of being able to advance those 4 ideas of what it is to be the most senior scholar in this university and beyond the borders of this university. That decision has already been done. It's already been made 12 months ago, as you heard. And so I leave it to all of us for this to sink in and for us to continue to ask questions. I suggested at the beginning that when Professor Mbohwa stands up and presents himself to us this evening, that it will be an opportunity for us to assess the state of the university. And so through his lecture, I hope that you had insight into the state of not only this university, but of the contemporary university, planet-wide, through its most senior scholar, in this instance, Professor Mbohwa. And I hope that you will have agreed with the Senate of this University of Johannesburg that he is indeed a worthy candidate, that indeed he is worthy of the title of professor, of the office of professor. It is because of that that I believe that we will all benefit immensely from his ongoing stewardship and leadership as he now, at least, continues to present his work, his questions, his challenges to his students, to his peers, to his colleagues across the world. And so, thank you very much for listening, and again, Prof, thank you very much for those sharp insights that helped, I think, some of us even further situate this very important, new and emerging field within the engineering discipline or field. So on that note, can I invite therefore the Dean and you, Prof, to join us in doing the formalities of putting on the robes of the office. Hopefully these robes will be not too heavy, but pleasant in the journey that lies ahead. Or that already started, of course, a while ago. Just putting it in. I don't normally do this. Yeah, let's find your arm there.
Complicated.
Down. You just missed it again, eh?
Otherwise, it's going to struggle to stretch this far.
Okay. I'm too big here.
We need some coaching as well. You see, we've just got our coach here. Did you check the size? So there we have it, colleagues. There we present
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.